What defines a saint? What defines a saint? It's a really tough question to answer, I think, because no two saints are alike. If you were to tell me that saints are kind and gentle and point to St. Francis of Assisi and Mother Teresa, I'd say, yeah, okay. But what about St. Jerome, who was kind of a notorious curmudgeon? Or what about Padre Pio, who was known for his fiery temperament, throwing people out of the confessional if he believed that they weren't sorry enough for their sins? If you were to tell me that all saints are pious and dignified, and you told me about Saint Benedict and Saint Faustina, I'd say sure. But what about Carlo Acutis, who played video games and collected Pokemon cards? What about Saint Philip Neri, who shaved off half of his beard and wore his clothing inside out? What about Dorothy Day, who was a feisty ragtag defender of the poor? I think you kind of see probably where I'm going with this. You can name a bunch of attributes of saints, but pretty much none of the saints have more than a few things in common with each other. And that makes sense, right? Because saints are real people. If you look around this church right now, how many of us, how much do any of us really have in common with the other? We like different sports teams. We listen to different music. We're passionate about different things. What makes you angry may not make me angry. What makes me happy may not make you happy. But is that a big deal? Are our superficial commonalities or differences important at all if we hold one major thing in common? And I think the answer to that is resoundingly no. The superficial differences of the saints mean nothing ultimately because of what they held in common. They all held one thing in common. And it's the same thing that I hope all of us can hold in common. And that is the desire to be completely abandoned to the will of God. Completely abandoned to the will of God. You know, sometimes I reflect on this personally. What is the surefire way to peace in this life? We all want peace, right? So how do we get there? Some will say, oh, it's family and friends, right? It's family and friends. But there are people without family or friends. Some will say it's traveling. It's in having a lot of great experiences of the world. Some people probably never leave Tarrant County, right? Some will say it's a good job, a sense of purpose, or, kind of a reason to get up every day and be productive. But some people are unable to work. Some people struggle with disabilities, maybe mental illnesses that might make it difficult to ascribe a clear sense of purpose every single day. So ultimately, I think that the path to peace is this. It's to see ourselves as belonging completely to God. To see ourselves as belonging completely to God, to see everything as gift, life, death, sickness, health, bounty, poverty, achievement, loss, joy, sorrow, all of it. All of it is good because it comes from God, is a participation in the will of God, and draws us closer to God. It's like what St. Paul says in our second reading today from the letter to the Philippians. He says, I know how to live in humble circumstances. I know how to live with abundance. In every circumstance and in all things, I have learned the secret of being well fed, and the secret of going hungry, of living in abundance, and of being in need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. In other words, he's saying it doesn't matter to me whether I'm rich or poor, hungry or well fed. The only thing that matters to me is my relationship with the Lord. It's in him that I find my strength, and nothing in this world can ever supplant that or take it away. I think all of us know people who are like this. Absolutely nothing can shake their peace. They come into wealth. If they come into wealth, they praise God. They get diagnosed with a terminal illness. They praise God. They gain a grandson or a granddaughter, they praise God. They lose a loved one, they praise God. They experience the best of humanity, they praise God. They see war and violence and evil, as we all see right now, and they still praise God. It's all praise because everything is God's divine will. Everything is his design. That was a catchphrase of one of my favorite saints, Blessed Solanus Casey, the Capuchin, the Franciscan friar from Detroit, Michigan. He was frail. He was poor. He was overworked. He suffered from a horrific skin ailment that caused him round-the-clock pain. And yet he would constantly declare, "Blessed be God in all his designs. Blessed be God in all his designs." So if you're like me, you're probably asking, well, that's awesome and everything, but how do I get there? How do I get to that point where I can say, "Blessed be God in all his designs"? I'm clearly not there yet. I complain about things all the time. I'm a big baby when it comes to pain and loss. I easily fall into fear when I see the state of the world around me. I'm sure many of you can relate. Really, the only things that make me happy are the things that you might expect would make anybody happy, right? Achievement, comfort, pleasure, fulfillment. I feel blessed when things are good, as I'm sure most of us do. You know something? I think that's okay. That's normal. We can all get to that place of complete abandonment to God's will, that place of complete peace. But it's a process. It comes in that slow process of letting go, of remembering that all things in this life are indeed fleeting and that eternity is what matters. And so we let go of attachments. We let go of control. Am I constantly focused maybe on my appearance? Do I need to be perceived as attractive, as youthful, as beautiful? Let it go. Do I make an idol of my health, of my fitness? What if an illness or an accident took all of that away from me? Let it go. Do I love my family, my wife, my husband, my children, my grandchildren, my job, my home, my livelihood? All of these things are good, of course, but they're passing. Love them while you have them, but be ready to let them go. Probably shared this story before, but I want to share it again because I think it's so helpful. This story I share oftentimes when I do funeral masses. There's a great book called He Leadeth Me. It's written by the servant of God, Walter Chiswick, Father Walter Chiswick. He was an American priest, and he ended up in prison in the Russian Gulag, the camps during World War II, and the years that followed. He was there for quite some time. And Father Chiswick, he talks about, as you would guess, his horrendous treatment within the gulags, the physical torture, but really more than anything, the mental torture, the poverty. He was forced to say Mass using breadcrumbs and whatever wine that he could use, he would hold in the palm of his hand, use his hands as a chalice. But routinely, the Russian soldiers would round him up and other prisoners, and they would blindfold him. And they would take him and the rest of the prisoners and put them before the firing squad. Except when the order to fire was given, the soldiers would put down their guns and begin to laugh at the prisoners. And then they would send them back to their cells, and they would do this constantly. It was a form of mental torture. Later, Father Chiswick was reflecting on his experience, and he was asked if he was afraid that he would someday be executed there in the prison and never return home to America. And he said, "No, I no longer feared death. I saw it as nothing more than the thin veil separating me from God." The thin veil separating me from God. It's a beautiful image that we hear, and that's from the book of the prophet Isaiah that we hear today. The thin veil that separates us from God, this delicate little piece of cloth that hides God from us. I don't know about you, but I don't really feel like there's a thin veil between me and God. Sometimes it feels more like a wall, a steel curtain, to borrow a phrase from my native Pennsylvania. And that's a wall of my own choosing, right? It's the wall I put up when I decide that I'm going to let my worldly attachments and my need for control and my desire to plan keep me from abandoning myself fully to God. It's the wall I put up when I decide I'm going to be attached to my sin, attached to my pride, attached to my grudges, attached to my fears, attached to all of these things that keep my soul from true peace in this life. And yet, what does God offer me? The thin veil. The thin veil. When Christ is crucified on Calvary, we hear the temple veil is split. You probably remember that awesome scene in Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ film, when you see the temple veil split in two. The wall between us and God has vanished, but I put it right back up again. I put it right back up, and I'm sure a lot of you can say the same, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that, but I do it anyway. And so I pray, Lord, help me. Help me to let go. And I hope you all pray that with me. I hope you pray that with me. Help me to begin that process of letting go, of abandoning myself to you, whatever that looks like, so that when my time comes, I might find that that veil between me and you is thin, so thin that I can pass right through it like a gentle breeze. There's a reason why Jesus uses this awesome wedding imagery in this parable from today's gospel. Of course, we all know this story. A king is throwing a wedding banquet for his son. He sends out his servants to summon all these invited guests. The invited guests reject the invitation. So the king sends servants out. He says, invite everybody, right? Invite everybody else. All the ones that maybe nobody would ever think to invite to the wedding. And they all show up. They're ready for the party, except for one guy, right? One guy who isn't in the appropriate wedding attire, this poor guy. And boy, does the king let this guy have it, right? And when I was younger, this parable, I didn't understand it, so it used to bother me. I was like, well, this isn't fair. This poor guy, he probably can't afford nice clothes, right? So he gets thrown into the dark. What kind of message is that? This is the gospel? That doesn't sound like a nice message, right? But obviously, that's not the message here at all. This is actually a really neat metaphor that Jesus is presenting here. The church, as we hear St. Paul often say this, the church is the bride of Christ. Church is the bride of Christ. The banquet that Jesus is speaking about in this parable, it's not just some random banquet, right? To celebrate the wedding of a man and a woman, just two random people. It's a banquet to celebrate the wedding of Christ with his church. Those who are invited to this banquet that Jesus says, go out of the streets, invite all these people. Those who are invited to the banquet, they are not mere guests. They are the espoused. They are being invited to their own wedding banquet, showing up to their own wedding. Now we see what's wrong with the guy who showed up without his proper garment. He's not ready for the marriage. He's not ready for that veil to be lifted. There's a wall between him and Christ. So he's left outside. Y'all, we're being invited to that same wedding. Every single day we're being invited to that same wedding. I don't want to be left outside, and I know you don't either. I want to pass through that thin veil. I want to be at that banquet on my wedding day. And what that means for me in this life is that it's time to let go. It's time to let go of those things that are keeping me from being united to Christ. I focus on passing things rather than eternal things. I want to be able to be the man who says, blessed be God in all his designs. I want to be the man for whom illness and poverty and trials are of no concern, and for whom death is not loss but gain, as we hear St. Paul say. But before I gain, I need to lose. And I think all of us probably need to lose quite a bit. Lose my pride, lose my sin, lose all of those things that build that wall in between me and God. And praise God, I'm alive and breathing to do that, and so are all of you. But for how long, I don't know. I don't know how long for any of us. None of us know. So we begin that process now, when we remember that our lives are fleeting and that the only peace to ever be achieved in this life is through self-abandonment. Lord, give us the grace to desire it.